All right. Welcome to another episode of the Tribal Training Podcast. This podcast is all about the number one beginner 70.3 mistake that I see in training. It is the prioritization of the long run in training. And this podcast is inspired by a conversation that I had with a friend this past week who is self training himself towards his first 70.3, and I did a little bit of a training check on him, and he has fallen into this trap that I see a lot of guys fall into. And so I want to talk you through what he is doing, the problems he's running into, and how I would guide him out of this. And then my overall philosophy is just to like, how do we build towards our first 70.3 and what should we be focusing our attention on? Because so often I see guys just focus on getting the long run in, and they're not thinking about this one key concept that is really the secret to all endurance training, triathlon, and beyond. But before we get into this, I want to present a peace treaty. This is between me and you, the listener. So if you are listening to this on Spotify, if you are watching this on YouTube, I have a peace treaty to offer. I am showing up here and I'm providing some good knowledge here, sharing from my experience. I'm trying to help you out, providing some entertainment. And all that I ask in return is that you subscribe on YouTube or follow on Spotify. If you're on Spotify, throw me 5 stars as well, please. It is March 25th, 2024, but I'm trying to build this thing for 2034, 2044. And in order to continue this mission of sharing my knowledge, helping people do endurance, and keep this whole thing moving forward, I need some help. I need some support. So, my ask for you is to accept this peace treaty and take 5 seconds and give me a subscribe on YouTube, give me a follow on Spotify. Okay, now that housekeeping is out of the way, let's get into the details of this episode. So, not gonna lie, me and my buddy, we chatted on him joining the tribe about 4 or 5 months ago, and just wasn't the right time for him. Totally cool. I said, listen, we'll revisit things when the time is right. But I knew his race was coming up, so I wanted to check in and see how his training was going. So I hit him up and I'm asking, how far out are you? How you training? How you feeling? He's like, listen, I'm about 8 weeks out and I'm feeling pretty good, but I'm getting killed by my long run. I'm like, okay, I hear this all the time. Tell me more. How long is the long run? So my buddy tells me, he's like, I just ran 11 miles this week, and for the past 2 days, I have been hobbling around the house. I can barely walk, and I'm just feeling like my body is destroyed. So right off the bat, I'm like, okay, well, unless my buddy is running like 9-minute miles or less, an 11-mile run is going to be taking him upwards of 2 hours, which is way too long for a long run for a beginner endurance athlete or a beginner triathlete. The long run does not need to be that long. And so once I hear that, the next thing that I want to do is I want to check in on his overall training volume. So I go to his Strava page and I want to see how long he's riding for each week. Because listen, if you can handle the 2 hour run, and if you're riding significantly more than that, then like maybe that is an okay protocol for you. But so often what I see guys doing is not riding enough, and maybe they have some run experience in the past, like maybe they've run some 5Ks, some other road running races, and like they've been hard. So like the frame of reference that guys have is like, well, if running 5 miles has been hard for me, I got to run more so that I can go run 13.1 in the race. And really what I want to share in this episode is just flipping all that around. So I go to my buddy's Strava page and I see that he's not riding more than 40 miles a week over the last 12 weeks. He has like 1 week where I think he hit 43, and every other week is under 40. And so I tell him, I'm like, dude, it doesn't matter if you can run 11 miles in training. If in this race, the 56-mile ride takes everything you've got, you're going to show up to that run with no energy. So, as much as we can find confidence in hitting the long distance run, if that is totally taking everything that we've got in training, it's not allowing us to bounce back and keep training moving forward. And it's not really moving forward the overall mission of developing the fitness so that we can show up to the run in the race ready to go. And this really leads to just like the number one lesson on how to develop an endurance. This is true of triathlon. This is true of any other kind of endurance you're trying to build. But this is really all about teaching the body how to maintain a manageable level of effort and then fueling it to keep going. That is the whole mission here. That manageable, steady, low effort, getting comfortable in that zone, and then giving the body the hydration, the electrolytes, and the carbohydrates to keep going. Like that is endurance. And so when I go ahead and I check in on some deeper details of my buddy's run, I see that it took him, I think it was about an hour 50, and he was at like 170 heart rate average the whole time, which I'm just thinking, I'm like, dude, that's a huge, huge effort. And if we are not doing long rides, we are totally missing out on the opportunity to do a 2-hour endurance session at like maybe 130 beats per minute heart rate or 140 beats per minute heart rate, like so much easier on the body. And if we would have just shifted that idea of that nearly 2-hour run to being a 2-hour ride, well, it would have been less taxing on the body and we would have been able to bounce back more quickly and we would have been able to keep training moving forward. So, trying to help my buddy out, I was like, dude, this is what I would do for you because your race is 8 weeks away. So, like, let's get directly tactical here. I was like, let's think about the final 3 weeks, like the closest 3 weeks to your race. Let's think about those being a shift to a bit of a maintenance mode and then a bit of a taper because it takes about 3 weeks for fitness to show up. So, let's think about now, week 8 to week 3, right? The next 5 weeks. Let's think about this being your push in training. And here is what I would focus on if I were you. I would normalize the 2-hour ride, bare minimum. I would normalize the 2-hour ride. We ideally want to get you up to about 3 hours. And really, in a perfect world, we'd have you hit 75 miles in a training session. Because the easiest way to make 56 miles in a race not feel like a big deal is to have done 75 in training. But even just on the basic time metrics, I want this guy hitting 2 hours minimum for his longer rides. And I want him getting at least 3 weeks or so at 3 hours or more. Because think about a 56-mile ride in a race. Like, I think it's about 18 miles an hour average that equates to a 3-hour ride. And if you're a beginner and if you're not used to riding a bike, you're probably not hitting 18 miles an hour. It's probably more like 15 or 16. So we're probably looking at this thing taking you more like 4 hours, right? So we need to normalize that. Otherwise, the body in the race is going to be like, what the fuck, dude? Now, on top of that, we'll go back to just like the basic amateur intention of just attacking the long run. So often guys just aren't even fueling for that properly. So the bike not only is the place to build the fitness, but it's the place to practice the fueling. Because the bike in a triathlon is totally about setting up the run for success, right? We want to normalize riding for 2 hours and 3 hours, and we want to normalize taking in 300 calories an hour or so on the bike so that we can show up to that run with good energy. And this is a core theme on how to execute a great race, whether you're a beginner, whether you're doing a sprint, or whether you're experienced and you're doing an Ironman. Like, it doesn't matter. The way to execute a strong triathlon is to show up to the run with as much energy as possible, right? Like, I like to share some just like easy, simple percentages. Like, let's say that you start the race at 100%. Maybe the swim takes 15% of your energy, you're down to 85%. Maybe the bike takes 15 more percent energy. So you show up to that run with 70%. Like, you can put out a good run like that. But if you haven't been training the swim and the bike adequately enough, maybe that swim takes 20% of your energy. Okay, you show up to the bike at 80%. Maybe that bike takes 40% of your energy. Now all of a sudden you're showing up to that run on 40% or even less, right? Like, those are just general numbers that I throw out there as an example. But like, that's the idea, is that we want to show up to the run with as much energy as we can. And so in order to do that, we really want to prioritize the bike in training, because the bike is where fitness is built. And we can think about the run as being developed from more of a durability standpoint, rather than the run being the thing that builds the fitness. Because overall, like, I think that a lot of guys like to lean into prioritizing the run in training because it gives them some safeguard against the run going poorly in a race. But the reality is, the back half of a run, no matter the race distance, like, it should be a fight. Like, you should be digging to depths that you've never gone to before. You should really be like willing yourself to the finish line, fighting that voice in your head that wants to quit. Right. But we need to set you up to have that experience be one where you are digging into reserves you didn't have in a positive way, rather than being completely broken and having like a death march of a run. Right. So those are some overall ideas. Now, tactically, let's get into how I was trying to help my buddy here adjust his run training. Number one, I was like, dude, let's just make your stock run in the week like 40-minute endurance run. That's fine. 40, 45 minutes. And then let's cap your long run at 80 minutes. You don't need to be running longer than 80 minutes right now. Maybe we can get some 90-minute sessions in. If you're feeling good enough, maybe you can get a little bit longer, a little bit closer to the race. But for right now, you totally need to prioritize the bike. Like, 40 miles a week, the race distance is 56 miles. Like, we got to be riding at least 100 miles a week, in my opinion. And I think it's worth noting that this is just also in terms of like, we don't need to be like having some heroic time-based performance. This is more about just like how we have this race be a success overall, and how we set this athlete up to have a good experience. So yeah, overall, those are just some of the ideas. This is also, I will say, like, this is very different than like if you're on a structured plan. And I have a few athletes who will weave a half marathon into their 70.3 build. And I think that's totally fine, because we can make space for that. We can tack off a half marathon early in training and then kind of throw the run on autopilot while we get to build the bike up a bit. Like, that is doable. So I'm not opposed to the long runs like this coming in at the right time and place. But let's think about, again, what's going on with my buddy here is like, he's going out and running for nearly 2 hours when he's not even biking basically 2 hours a week. And we need to flip that around, because the bike is going to allow him to build more fitness by being at that lower intensity heart rate. And it's going to allow him to bounce back quicker and recover quicker. So if you are putting a lot of weight in the long run, I would very, very, very highly encourage you to back off of that mindset and ride more. Ride more. Gotta ride more. Gotta learn to fall in love with the bike. Gotta make it easy to get on the bike. Right. And so now this gets into like some of the logistical principles that we work on in tribal training. But it's like, maybe part of the reason why my buddy's not riding much is because it still takes him 30 minutes to get out the door. I didn't like dive into that with him, so I'm not totally sure. But we need to be able to get you on and off the bike trainer in just a couple of minutes. Like a 2-hour bike ride, we need to be able to execute that in like 2 hours and 10 minutes. Few minutes to get on, maybe a pee break or two, few minutes to get off, boom, you're back to doing what you're doing. Can't have a 2-hour ride taking 4 hours of production. Same with getting out the door on the weekends. Like, got to have the shit laid out the night before. Got to have the fuel laid out the night before. Got to have our clothes picked out. Got to make it easy to start. Right? So that all of a sudden we're not defaulting to, oh, well, I could just throw my run shoes on and it's just really easy to run from the house. Because I think that that's also a little layer in here as to why I see guys prioritize the run. And remember, the whole thing here is it doesn't matter if you can run 11 miles or 13.1 miles in training. If you show up to that run in the race on E, that run ain't going to go well. So we got to ride, we got to fuel. And again, the main lesson from this is that triathlon and endurance, it is all built on the foundation of managing a low intensity effort and fueling that well. Like that's how we get it done. All right. Thank you for listening.